Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about where we've been over the last year and where we're heading in the future. Let me try and get this to work properly. So it's certainly been interesting times. If we look back to where we were a year ago, as we've just been thinking, Brexit was on the cards. We'd signed the withdrawal agreement in October 2019, and that came into effect on 1st of February, so before this event last year. We'd effectively cleared the 2019 flu outbreak that had impacted significantly on racing during the previous year. And we just finished containing an equine herpes virus 1 outbreak in the south of England. So whilst COVID was knocking on the door, we were in a very different place. So over the last 12 months, we've obviously seen COVID, but we've seen some other major effects on the industry. We've seen this very sad demise of the Animal Health Trust. We've just been talking about the effects of the transition period coming to an end and the start of our post-transition world. And we've also, in the last week or so, seen the worrying cases of equine herpes virus as an outbreak starting in the south of Europe and spreading up through Europe. So it's been a pretty tough and pretty exciting 12 months. And how have we done? What does our school report say? Well, if we break it down into the various different areas, racing has had a tough time, closed for a while, was then able to reopen. Thank heaven it was, because the extended closure for racing would have been an absolute tragedy for the industry and would have had wide-ranging and long-term repercussions. Equestrian sport has also suffered hugely. As we know, there have been pockets of competition, but the majority of competition throughout the last 12 months has been unable to take place. And it's been really sad to see the events. Simon's been talking about them just now, but badminton cancelled twice in a row now. Let's hope we can get back to some sort of sense of normality. I know everyone's gearing up for the return of competition at the end of the month, and let's hope that it can actually happen without further delays due to either COVID or any other disease. If we look at breeding and sales, well, the industry probably breaks down into a thoroughbred effect and a non-thoroughbred effect there. So the sales of thoroughbreds were affected last year. Thoroughbred sales as an entity were either cancelled or were changed venue or changed their format, and values were down in thoroughbred sales, although perhaps not as far down as the industry thought they might be. And there's also going to be an impact on the number of foals born in the future. Coverings are down a bit, and that's probably down to confidence in COVID, confidence in the post-transition phase of Brexit, the challenges of moving mares, as Henry's just mentioned, and also an uncertainty about the financial future. However, that doesn't seem to have affected the sport horse market and sport horse breeding. Sport horse sales have been strong, and leisure horse sales have been strong, as both in numbers, as measured by blood samples submitted as part of pre-purchase exams, but also in values. And I think we've all seen the phenomenal values that some of the sport horses and leisure horses have been making over the last 6 months. And we've also seen an increase in AI and embryo transfers over the last year. And perhaps that's a reflection of the fact that some of the mares who would have been competing during the breeding season last year weren't able to compete. And so owners decided to take advantage of that opportunity. What about health and welfare? How have they done over the last year? Well, the positive thing about COVID is that horses weren't mixing, and where horses don't mix, they're very likely to spread disease. So it's been quite quiet on the disease front during the COVID outbreak. On the healthcare provision side of things, well, there were some initial concerns that vets weren't going to be able to get out there and provide their services, as with other allied professionals. But through discussion with DEFRA and with the chief veterinary officers, we've been able to continue to supply great veterinary services throughout the last 12 months, as have farriers and equine dental technicians, physios, and the like. And then what about welfare concerns? Well, I think that's something where we've been, where people probably haven't recognised the huge work that was done. If we look back into last April, May, we didn't really know what the future was going to hold in terms of COVID. We didn't know if racing was going to shut down completely. We didn't know the impact on horse ownership, etc. But three things happened, which I think show how well we can work when we're faced with a crisis. So racing and the thoroughbred industry put together a fund by which they could support trainers whose owners potentially were not going to be able to afford training fees. Thankfully, that's hardly been required at all. The welfare organisations, the larger welfare organisations, put together a fund whereby they could support smaller welfare organisations who were falling on tough times due to COVID, to make sure that there wasn't an increasing welfare problem. And that's been used significantly. I think to around 25 small organisations have been able to take advantage of that. And we should commend the bigger bodies for enabling that. And we should also commend the British Horse Society, who've created a pot from within their own reserves to support riding schools, their riding schools that were unable to work during the COVID lockdowns. So three areas where we've really demonstrated our ability to react to a potential threat, even though that threat as yet has perhaps not been fully realised. So what about equestrian trade? Well, Claire's just talked about the challenges of Brexit, so I won't focus on those, but I'll perhaps just touch on the impact on trade that COVID had. Amongst humans, we faced shortages of loo roll because there was panic buying of that. Well, our equivalent in the horse world was panic buying of feed and bedding. Fortunately, it never got to become a real problem, and we were able to limit things to a degree there, but it was a potential worry at the time. Food and bedding have been maintained, but there is a threat to them over Brexit, and Claire's already highlighted those points. Our services, the veterinary services, the allied professional services, people like saddle fitters and so on, have been able to work safely during the COVID period. So by and large, they have been okay, okay being the word, not great. But as Simon has just pointed out very eloquently, the events suffered massively during last year. The trade stands associated with those events suffered, and the added threat that Brexit is applying to those events can't be underestimated, and we should be addressing those collectively. The big winner, I suppose, has been online retailers. The online spend in the horse industry, Claire tells me, is up by nearly 40% over the last year, and that's been good news for some. If we look at horses themselves, well, I've already mentioned the strength of horse sales amongst the non-thoroughbred sector, but it's also interesting to note that the rehoming bodies also saw an uptick in rehoming during a period of last year. And that probably reflects the fact that owners had more time to ride, and there was potentially a time to reflect on how one was spending one's free time and one's money. And there was the obvious thing that people weren't going on holiday, so there's perhaps a little bit more money to spend on their horses and the pastimes that they were able to carry out. So some things worked. What were those things? And what can we learn from them? Well, I think, we're as a group, we're used to working outdoors. We're used to working in all weathers. We have to deal with large, unpredictable, dangerous animals to do what we want to do. So we're quite resilient as a bunch. And because of that resilience, we're not protected from some of the harsh realities. That, I think, has stood us in very good stead this year and enabled us to move forward. However, it's fair to say, I think, that our teamwork in the past hasn't always been great. We've sometimes been a bit disjointed as a sector. But I think this year we've shown much more collaboration. We've worked hugely well together with government, with industry, and across Europe. And we're going to need to continue to do that in the coming months and years, particularly during this, to address the post-transition challenges that we're facing, as has just been discussed. So what have we done over the last year that's worked well? Well, the British Horse Council met weekly and then subsequently fortnightly throughout the year to try and bring together our thoughts, to look at our challenges and to see what we could do to combine our efforts. And that has worked significantly well. Currently, there's a lot of focus on transport challenges of moving horses within Europe. Previously, there was discussions about what facilities we could use under COVID lockdowns, who could work, who couldn't work, what the implications were of the furlough scheme and of the other limitations that were placed upon us during the COVID lockdowns. And the fact that we as an industry were able to come together and agree some common threads and agree a plan of action enabled us to go to government for our weekly DEFRA meetings to address those points in a coordinated fashion. And it's fair to say that government, particularly the DEFRA team led by Simon Waterfield, have listened to what we've said as an industry, have recognised where things are critical, have been prepared to try and understand the challenges that are specific to our sector and to act upon them where we can. And in return, we've been able, as a sector, to understand some of the limitations that government has faced under COVID, and also to understand where the challenges for this post-Brexit period are and what government can do about them and what require input from other areas. We've also collaborated in other fields. So in terms of our reaction to the closure of the Animal Health Trust, led by the Horse Race Betting Levy Board and the thoroughbred industry, but being inclusive of the rest of the sector, we're looking at ways in which we can replace the services, the critical services that the Animal Health Trust previously supplied to our sector. And just in the last few days, we've been working across the industry with the sports and the vets and the welfare organisations, as well as our European friends, to look at ways that we might be able to address the crisis, the equine herpes virus outbreak crisis that started in Spain and is now spreading throughout Europe, in the attempt to minimise the chances of it reaching our shores, and if it does, to contain it appropriately. So I think we've done pretty well, but where do we go to from here? Well, Simon has mentioned some really important points in terms of addressing the challenges of Brexit, and I commend him for pointing out how important it is that we work as one, as an industry, with all parts represented, to make our point and to make our point heard, both in Europe and in the UK, to make this a political issue and understand the fact that it is not the civil servants that are causing the problem. It is an issue that has to be addressed across Europe, and we need to make it political, as do our European friends. But what can we do in the UK? Well, there is a thing which you may have heard Stuart refer to earlier this morning called the Equine Health and Welfare Pathway. Now, that's a concept that was devised by the team at DEFRA and the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England. In particular, Michael Seals, chair of that board, and Tim Morris, member of that board, who are great friends of the equine industry and supporters of the equine industry, have put a lot of time and thought into developing this. And it is a concept which is of a partnership between industry and government that will allow us to improve and enhance, make better and more efficient our industry. But the key is it's a partnership. So we need to play our full part in that, and we need to make sure we justify why we need government support and where we need government support. And we also need to recognise that we're not just dealing with DEFRA in England, but we're dealing with all the devolved administrations who have different approaches. So we need to draw those in, as we have done over the last year through regular meetings with the teams in the devolved administrations, to provide a collaborative way forward, not just within the sector, but between our four countries, to ensure a successful outcome. But what does this pathway look like, and why are we doing it? Well, we should have the world's best horse industry. Some say we already do, but it is under threat. It is under threat for a number of reasons, one of which is clearly Brexit, as we've discussed. We should have the best horse industry in the world, and we should have no doubt about that. What do we need to do? What do we need to address? Well, as I've already said, we perhaps lacked common goals across our industry in the past, so we need to come together and collaborate more. Perhaps because we've lacked those common goals, we've not been able to garner government support. And also, we need to work together to enhance our communications, as has been pointed out by Simon. Now we're being asked to come up with a plan. That plan needs to be ambitious, achievable. It needs supported by us as an industry, all our stakeholders. It needs government support, and we need to consult on it. And we will be consulting on the whole of the industry to make sure it has a future. So What are the building blocks? Well, very briefly, we have to start somewhere. These are imperfect, but it gives us an outline. We do want better welfare, better husbandry, better facilities, and better accountability for those who are working within the sector. We want a better future. We need to address the issues of social license. We're in a new world now. We can't expect the public to go along with us just because they have in the past. And that also means that we need to address inclusivity. We're talking about that later on. We shouldn't ignore the fact that we don't have a wide range of groups of people within our sector. We need to address that. We need to address it now. And we need to engage with people across the sector as spectators, as participants, in any way that they can be involved. We need better business and better activities. We need to ensure that the racing and the sports and the leisure sectors are vibrant and lively and make financial sense. We've heard the threats to those that Brexit has created. And we need to understand and make sure that trade is supported so that Claire's team can work and work effectively. And in particular, from my perspective as a vet, we need to ensure that there's strong health of horses. We need to prevent disease, prevent injury, and limit the impact of all of those. Focusing down on preventing disease, we all know about vaccination and the importance of effective vaccination uptake and effective vaccines. It's equally true of horses as it is of humans. And we need an effective infectious disease control system. What do we mean by that? And I'm drilling down here just to give you an example of where collaboration is possible. For effective disease control, we need data. We've heard all about that from Stuart and the Livestock Information Service this morning. We need identification, so we need disease surveillance and laboratories that can carry out the work. And we need a strategy for addressing those things. Fortunately, in the past, we've had the benefit of the Animal Health Trust and Richard Newton's excellent team there to guide us and provide us with laboratory expertise. That's not available to us anymore. So we need to collaborate across the sectors, as I've already mentioned, to get a system in place which we all contribute to and government supports that enables us to make effective disease control. And there are opportunities here for us to encourage government to change legislation, to create training opportunities, and to create incentives for us to work better to develop a network which enables our industry to be best in world. And then just to sum up, where are we now? Well, we have been through a period of adversity. We are still in a significant period of adversity. We have risks in the future because there's a potential for a financial crisis that will have ongoing impact on our sector, as well as the Brexit issues. But this could be a golden opportunity for us to build on our collaborations in the past year, engage across the sector, consult with the sector, and develop a brighter future where we are genuinely and unequivocally the best horse sector in the world. Thank you.
We are slightly running out of time, and I'm conscious that it's munch time. But a number of questions have actually come around, and this is an interesting one. There have been a number of individuals on the call who'd be quite keen at knowing how they can participate or collaborate more. So can you give any advice?
Thanks, Tim. Yes, so the British Horse Council has 2 open meetings a year. They're virtual at the moment, obviously. So I would encourage people to engage with those meetings, to come along and attend those meetings and provide their input, listen to what's going on. I would also encourage people to look at the British Horse Council website. The consultations that are responded to are all listed on that website, and we welcome input from people. Also get to know the people who are perhaps have an area of expertise who sit on the board of the British Horse Council. So from the animal health perspective, that would be me for vets. There's Rory who covers the welfare side of things. People can look on the website, but racing, sport, breeding, trade are all covered, and make contact with the people who are dealing with your area of involvement.
Okay, thanks, David. And really following up on from that, with the closure of or the risk of riding schools being closed due to COVID, how are you taking that forward, and how are you communicating it back to, if you like, riding school owners?
So our link with riding school owners would be through the British Horse Society primarily. It's important to recognise that as a British Horse Council, we all have day jobs, and this is something we do in addition to that. So there is no funding, and Simon's right to point out there is need for funding in order for big activity to happen. I suppose our job is communicating information into government and relaying what we can back out. So in terms of communicating information into government, that's done on a weekly basis, and we've certainly been highlighting the challenges that are being faced by riding schools and the significant potential impacts that are going to happen if things don't change very shortly. In terms of messaging out, we tend to do that through communication, the regular media channels, but also through those who are involved in leisure and sporting activities. So much of that will come out of the BHS, as I've said, or the BEF.
Okay. Thanks very much, David, for an excellent, very quick and rigorous overview.